What? What was that? Honestly, I'm still trying to piece together what happened in that footballing funhouse of a night. I don't know if I watched a football match or a cosmic morality play written by the ghost of Shakespeare after a Red Bull binge. It ended 2-2, officially. Paris Saint-Germain lift the trophy after a 4-3 win on penalties. But that barely scratches the surface of whatever theater unfolded in Udine. Tottenham were winning. No. Tottenham were really winning. Mickey van de Ven and Christian Romero scored either side of halftime, and for 79 straight minutes, they looked like they had PSG in a sleeper hold. Not just beating the Champions League winners, containing them, nullifying, suffocating. Like a python made of recycled West London grit and Danish pragmatism. And then, they just let go. They loosened their grip. The pulse slowed. The game, which had been a clamp-tight display of structure and resistance, slipped between their fingers like one of those tragic sand mandalas monks make, and then sweep away. I'll say this. If Thomas Frank wanted to make his first night unforgettable, well, mission accomplished. First competitive match in charge and you're minutes from lifting a European trophy, and then you're clutching your runners-up medal like it's a parking ticket. There's no real way to dress this up as anything but emotionally catastrophic for Tottenham. There are no moral victories when you're holding a 2-0 lead with 5 minutes left. You don't get credit for almost crossing the finish line. Ask any marathon runner who passed out 4 feet from the ribbon. You could see it in the players' faces, in Romero's blank stare, in the way Bentancur's penalty hit the net like it didn't want to. In the fans, frozen in white in the stands, realizing that hope is not just a dangerous thing. It's practically illegal in Tottenham kits. Let's be honest, PSG weren't even good. Not until the final stretch. They didn't deserve to be in the conversation for 70 minutes. They looked like a team that had forgotten what boots were for. But when Fabian Ruiz came on, suddenly the midfield had a metronome again. Suddenly Kang-In looked like a footballing magician instead of a bench option. Suddenly Ramos was scoring headers in the 94th minute like it was the plan all along. There's something so viciously poetic about Tottenham being the architects of their own collapse. It's become a tragic tradition. Like watching Icarus tape his wings back on with duct tape and yelling, "Trust me this time." 2 goals up, 5 minutes left. And instead of managing the moment, they let it manage them. And if you're neutral, oh, you feasted. This match gave you the whole football buffet. You got structure, strategy, suspense, and then in the final 10 minutes, a full-blown Shakespearean tragedy where everyone dies and the ghost wins the trophy. It was opera. It was slapstick. It was a bottle of champagne shaken for 90 minutes, popped open, and then poured directly into a wood chipper. You know what made it worse for Spurs? It's not that they lost the penalty shootout, it's how they lost it. They let it. Vitina missed PSG's first, Tottenham were up, they were calm, they were cool, Solanke slotted, Bentancur converted, and then the lights dimmed, Van de Ven missed, Mathis Tell missed, Nuno Mendes rifled it into the roof like a bank heist getaway driver, and that was it. Game over, trophy gone, see you never, you couldn't script this. Well, you could. If your script was co-written by a lifelong Tottenham fan and their ex-therapist. It was a night when reality decided to wear clown makeup. PSG, who hadn't played a single preseason friendly and were running on protein shakes and memory foam, somehow walked away with the silver. Spurs, who looked like they'd come to take the crown by force, left the pitch like ghosts. And somewhere, in the echoing chambers of football's tragic canon, someone quietly slid this night in next to 3-0 up at Stamford Bridge and Lucas Moura in Amsterdam. Because what started as a fairy tale ended in folklore. And yet, weirdly, it wasn't a disaster. Not completely. It was more like a Greek myth, full of glory and guts and a thunderbolt thrown at the end just to remind everyone who's really in charge. Tottenham didn't bottle this. Not like the cheap version of that insult that gets tossed around. No. They bled for it. They ran. They sweated. They blocked everything. This wasn't lazy or soft or spoiled. It was something far more haunting. It was heroic failure, the kind that sticks. And that's what makes it so much worse. They were brilliant until they weren't. And by then, it was too late. Let's rewind. Let's go back to how this all unfolded. It started fast, not furious, not chaotic. but tight, controlled, like both teams had something to hide and 1,000 cameras were watching. Which, to be fair, they were. Tottenham were dressed for the occasion. White shirts, straight lines, crisp movement. The first few minutes told us everything we needed to know. Thomas Frank wasn't here to imitate Ange. This was his version of pragmatism. Not the old rope-a-dope Tottenham that sulked in its own half like a kid in timeout, but a more surgical thing. A controlled retreat followed by sudden bursts forward. And PSG? They were rusty. That's not even analysis. That's just visible fact. You could smell the off-season on them. Their touches were wooden. Their press was more wishful thinking than threat. Kvaratskhelia looked like a guy who downloaded his own highlight reel last night to remember how his feet worked. And so the door opened. Tottenham didn't need 100 passes. They needed one. One throw-in, one free kick, one poorly defended corner. That's all. And in the 38th minute, the lid came off. Vicario, who played that first half like he was being paid by the second for each pass he pinged, floated a diagonal to Romero at the back post. Romero, whose very existence is chaos and combat stitched together, nodded it across, where Van de Ven, of all people, muscled into the box like a man who hadn't read the script. Palhinha's volley was tipped onto the bar and came down with snow on it. But there was Van de Ven again, arriving like an overachieving fullback in a Champions League final to smash it into the net. 1-0. Spurs were dancing. You could see it in the limbs. The movement had rhythm. Not pretty, not flashy, but coordinated, like soldiers in synchronized formation. PSG were still technically present, but spiritually they were somewhere between dazed and disgusted. There were no shots on target for them in the first half. Read that again. The reigning Champions League winners who disemboweled Inter Milan not 3 months ago looked like a kid's choir trying to sing opera after their voices broke. And Tottenham. They nearly made it 2 right before the break. Kudus, all silk and snap, headed the ball against the post after another recycled set piece. The sound of the post being rattled might as well have been a church bell tolling for PSG's midfield. At halftime, the camera caught Luis Enrique pacing like a man deciding whether to throw his clipboard or eat it. You could feel the shift coming. But it didn't come. Not right away. Instead, 48 minutes on the clock, Porro swung in a free kick. Romero again. Romero the captain. Romero the destroyer. Romero the ghost of all your failed clearances. He had so much room it felt impolite. He didn't even jump. Just picked his spot and drilled it into the net. 2-0. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't stylish. But it was exactly what Tottenham needed, and everything PSG couldn't handle. Chevalier, bless him, had gloves on, but might as well have brought oven mitts. Now let's pause here. If this was your first football match, you'd be forgiven for thinking, wow, Tottenham are really good at this. And you know what? For 50 minutes, heroic even, Bentancur was running like a man trying to get his job back. Kudus looked like he was trying to win the Ballon d'Or just by body-finding Marquinhos into early retirement. Sarr was winning duels he had no business winning. It was a team in full chorus. Then came the slow leak. It started as subtle things. Losing second balls, gaps appearing in wide areas, Spence beginning to look like a man who left the oven on at home. PSG, finally smelling the blood, or perhaps just remembering who they were, brought on Fabian Ruiz. And suddenly, it was like someone turned the match back on. Like PSG had just downloaded their footballing firmware update. Still, Tottenham held. 70 minutes. 75. 80. Ruiz had a shot blocked that looked destined for the top corner. Romero threw his body in front of it like a Marvel hero auditioning for pain. At 85, the scoreline still read 2-0. PSG had thrown on Lee, Ramos, Mbaye. They had taken off their non-functional attack and replaced it with a newer, shinier version, one with actual intent. The corner came. Spurs cleared, but not well enough. The ball ended up at the feet of Kang-In Lee. Edge of the box, just enough space, just enough time. He didn't lash it. He placed it into the corner, past Vicario like it had been written in cursive. 2-1, and you could feel it. Not hope. No, hope is what Spurs fans lose. What they felt was inevitability. That collective sigh wasn't exhaustion. It was trauma, because you could see the fragility now. Legs were shaking. Time wasn't moving fast enough. Tottenham couldn't get out of their own half. PSG had become a blue wave, building, crashing, rolling back, building again. Tottenham? Beached, limp. Defending by instinct alone. 6 minutes of added time. I assume that's when several televisions in North London met their violent ends. 94 minutes. Hakimi gets the ball on the right. Dembele, finally wide, finally not trying to play like he's a number 10 in a dream sequence, darts toward the byline. Cross. In comes Ramos, stooping like a soldier ducking under wire. Bang. 2-2. And you didn't even need to see the net ripple. You could see it on the Spurs players. The oxygen left their bodies. The camera cut to Frank, and you could tell he was reviewing every choice he made since breakfast. It was like watching someone fall off a ladder in slow motion, except the ladder was made of gold and the floor was on fire. So yes, it went to penalties. But don't kid yourself. The result was already written. Still want to talk about that shootout? Yeah, we're going there next. Let's talk about the shootout then. Not because it was fair, not because it was reflective, but because it was inevitable. The tragic curtain call to an opera nobody auditioned for. Tottenham fans will tell you, maybe not now, maybe not out loud, that the second Ramos's header hit the net, the penalty outcome felt preordained. There's a look players get when their souls evacuate their bodies. That look was on half the squad. The other half were too tired to notice. But let's go through it anyway, step by curse step. Tottenham take first. Solanke, new kid, just subbed in, presumably full of adrenaline and naive optimism. Short run up, bang, top corner. For one fleeting moment you think maybe this is going to be one of those shootouts, the kind that heals. Then Vitina, PSG's first taker, and he misses it completely. Side of the post, not even close. It's a soft, sluggish miss, the kind you'd expect from a five-a-side ringer playing after 2 pints. 1-0 Spurs. Momentum, somehow, back in white. Next up, Bentancur. Oh, Bentancur. He'd been sensational during the match, intelligent, composed, tirelessly everywhere. And his penalty is pure class. Other side of the net, keeper guesses right, but it's too precise. 2-0, 2-0. At this point, you can hear the Tottenham fans starting to believe again. The edge of delirium. Because how many times do you see the opposition miss their first? You score your first 2, you're in the driver's seat. But being in the driver's seat doesn't matter when you've got no brakes, and the GPS is screaming recalculating in all caps. Ramos steps up next. Ramos, who had just written his name in Tottenham's obituary with that 94th minute header. His penalty? Hammered, right down the middle. If Vicario had stood still, it might have left a dent in his ribs. 2-1. Then comes Van de Ven. Yep, the same Van de Ven who scored the opener. Who had bled in this match like it was a cup final, which, it technically was. But penalty duty, a little curious. A lot risky. He goes low. Chevalier guesses left. It's saved, not emphatically, not dramatically, just stopped. The French keeper falls on it like he's smothering a kitten that wandered onto the pitch. Still 2-1. Suddenly, the door creaks open. Dembele, PSG's leading man. The guy who looked lost as a false 9, but now, back on the wing, is playing like he remembered who he is. Calm as you like. Bottom corner. 2-2. The axis is tilting. Then comes Mathis Tell, fresh legs, future star, big moment. He sends the keeper the wrong way, but the post has its own plans. He misses. You can see the color drain from his face mid-run up. Still 2-2. Lee steps up next. Remember him? The one who curled in the first of PSG's late goals like he was passing a note in class? He picks his corner, slots it like he's just placing it on a shelf. 3-2 PSG. For the first time, they're leading. Pedro Porro, Spurs' fourth taker. He's not shy. He never has been. And he finally breaks the PSG run with a thunderous finish. Levels it up at 3-3, but by this point it feels less like equal footing and more like clinging to a cliff edge by one hand. And now, Mendes. Nuno Mendes. The quiet destroyer down the left. He walks up like a man with nothing to lose. His run-up is smooth, his shot unsavable. Upper netting. Violence disguised as accuracy. 4-3. PSG win. Confetti cannons. We are the champions plays. Somewhere, Mercury weeps. You can't dress this up. Spurs lost that shootout the moment their knees buckled at 94. You could tell in the way they trudged to the spot. The weight. The limp belief. But what hurts more is that they had it. Not in a fluky way. They earned their 2-goal lead. They executed a plan. They suffocated the most dangerous attack in Europe for 85 minutes, then watched it unravel like a bad dream you can't wake up from. And let's not pretend PSG were electric. This wasn't some comeback masterclass. This wasn't Istanbul 2005. This was a team that looked asleep for most of the match until they were rescued by superior depth and, let's face it, Tottenham's enduring, tragic commitment to emotional sabotage. They didn't get blown away. They got worn down, like a wall holding back the tide. It held, it cracked, then it all came in. And after all that, all the pressing, all the blocks, all the tactical precision, all they have is a silver medal that feels radioactive. It's not that they didn't try. It's that they tried so hard and still ended up in the same place. And maybe that's the part that stings the most. Let's talk about the people. Because once the dust settles, once the confetti has been swept up, the medals tucked into bags, and the highlights begin their long, repetitive loop on every sports network, what you're left with are the humans. The players. The ones who lived this thing in 90-minute fragments of agony and glory. And let me tell you, they all left something out there. Start with Mickey van de Ven. He scored the opener. He made the block that should have been in a museum. He was flying into tackles, leaping into headers, breaking lines with those striding gallops like a giraffe with a law degree. For 85 minutes, he was immaculate. And then, he missed his penalty. Life in its cruelest symmetry. But you don't remember him for the miss. You remember him for playing like a man possessed, like he knew a trophy was within reach and he was willing to break every bone in his soul to get it. He was Tottenham's MVP on the night. And fate, like a troll under the bridge, took its toll anyway. Now Christian Romero, the new captain. The man who wears chaos like cologne. He scored. He defended like a lunatic with a purpose. He was barking orders, shoving teammates, being the moment. Romero wasn't just playing football. He was orchestrating survival. He led with fists and forehead. And for a while it worked, until it didn't. And even then, he nearly dragged them to the finish line with just his presence. If leadership had a face, it looked like him tonight. Bruised, exhausted, furious. Mohamed Kudus. My God. He played like electricity. There's no other word for it. He didn't complete every pass, but who cares? He didn't need to. He moved like someone who didn't believe in gravity. Skipping past defenders, rolling his body into strange geometries. He bullied Mendes. He danced through midfielders. He owned the first half. And he almost had a goal, that header that hit the post, the rebound that never came. Kudus was Tottenham's creator, their painter, their fire starter. And it was a performance that deserved more than a participation trophy. Then there was Rodrigo Bentancur. A performance stitched with thread and grit. You want someone to control a game when the oxygen runs thin? It's him. Smooth on the ball, ice cold from the spot. Everything he did was laced with class. He wasn't flashy, he was functional. In the most elegant, almost contemptuous way. If Tottenham win this game, he's the quiet hero no one notices until the rewatch. Pepe Matar Sarr, please. Get this man a cape. His shift was Herculean. He covered space like he was glitching. He tackled, he shielded, he passed, then he tackled again and again. When PSG tried to go central, he was there. When they tried to switch play, he was there. He came off with nothing left in the tank. And somehow, that's the image that sticks. The guy who ran until the wires burned out. Porro was mixed. Creative, yes. Sharp, sure. But defensively, he had moments that looked more interpretive dance than football. He scored his penalty, so he walks away with some dignity intact, but there were times when his positional sense felt experimental. And Spence, bless him, had a first half that made you think, maybe, just maybe, he's finally arrived. And then the second half came, and it came at him. He held up, mostly. But the cracks showed. PSG smelled the blood, and they targeted his side like a GPS-guided missile. Richarlison. Oh, Richarlison. There was effort. There was hustle. But the spark was missing. This was a man pressing with nothing to chase, floating wide when he needed to be central. There were a few moments, a half chance here, a burst of energy there, but if you're Tottenham and you need someone to step up and bury the game at 2-0, he didn't look ready. It was more of a cameo than a starring role. And then Solanke. Subbed in late, walked up first in the shootout, and buried his penalty like he'd done it 1,000 times. That's nerve. That's belief. He didn't touch the ball much. But in the shootout, he did his job. One of the few who did. On the other side, let's not pretend PSG were glorious. For most of this game, they were a team in crisis. They had no rhythm. Their midfield was a riddle written in crayon. And then, Fabian Ruiz. He came on and changed everything. He brought oxygen. He slowed things down without slowing things down. Suddenly, the ball was sticking. The movement made sense. He was the adult in the room. You don't win this game without him. Kang-In Lee, what a player, didn't even start. Comes off the bench and scores a laser-guided equalizer with 5 minutes to go. Then walks up in the shootout and curls his penalty into the corner like it was just another Tuesday. Cold-blooded. Elegant. Perfect. And Goncalo Ramos. The match was slipping. The minutes were melting. Spurs were still defending like an army of lawnmowers. And then Ramos shows up, bends his neck, and turns a cross into a dagger. That header, low, driven, timed like a symphony. That goal doesn't just level the match, it rips Tottenham's soul out through their bootlaces. Even Chevalier, the young keeper, handed the gloves in his debut. He conceded too. Could have maybe stopped Romero's shot. But in the shootout, he stood tall. Saved Van de Ven's. Watched Tell miss, and raised his arms as Mendes smashed home the winner. For a player with no business having that much poise, he walked away with a medal that says otherwise. And let's not forget Dembele, a ghost in the first half, a threat in the second, moved wide late and suddenly he was alive, not transcendent, but vital. His assist for Ramos, delicious. The cross had menace, the sort of ball that says, you better be there, or I'm not speaking to you again. Which brings us, of course, to Thomas Frank. He almost did it. First competitive match. 2-0 up against the champions of Europe. A performance built on bravery, structure, belief. And yet this sport, this venomous romantic opera, said not today. But Frank's fingerprints were all over the good parts. Spurs were brave. Spurs were ready. Spurs had PSG's blueprint, and for 85 minutes, they were carving it up like experts. But the bench lacked teeth. The legs gave way. The fear crept in. So here we are. Tottenham runners-up again, but not in disgrace. Not in shame, just in pain. The kind of pain that tells you this was real, this was close, this was earned. And PSG, they walk away with the silverware, yes. But this was no coronation, this was a jailbreak. This has been Across the Pitch, over and out.